Dear all, welcome to the seminar Global and National Data Portals, which is part of the 10th European GBIF nodes meeting here in Tallinn. And also welcome to the people watching online. We are very glad to host this European GBIF meeting. As you can see outside also, the weather is very nice and the spring in Estonia is in full swing. But on a global level, we are facing a biodiversity crisis, and several reports during the last years have indicated a rapid biodiversity loss. Even, you could say, based on the estimates, 1 to 2 species every hour. So I really hope that during those 2.5 hours, which we will spend here, we will try to offset in the long term the loss of biodiversity on a global scale. And not only to talk about biodiversity data portals as windows into the past biodiversity, but also as valuable tools for research, nature conservation, and environmental awareness for future generations. And to talk about a little bit about the Estonian developments, I'm the project manager for the Natural History Archives Network in Estonia. And during the past 10 years, we have managed to unite all of Estonia's scientific natural history collections, and also managed to develop a globally leading software called Pluto-F, which also the Estonian Biodiversity Data Portal is based on. And the data portal itself celebrates today the 10th anniversary, and Professor Urmas Kõljalg will talk more about this data portal, which has been central to Estonia's participation in GBIF. And also, recently, Estonia finally selected its national animal, the wolf. It took almost 5 years, and finally the wolf had a fierce competition from the hedgehog. But finally it was decided, and now we have, for the 100th anniversary of the Republic, we finally have a national animal also, and it symbolizes the untouched nature and also the health and the situation of the forest of Estonia. So there's a lot of pressure for biodiversity on a global scale, and also in more developed countries like here. Different industries, different habitat change, climate change, all those factors contribute to the biodiversity loss, especially during the last 40 years, which also coincides with doubling of the human population and extended use of fossil fuels. But to talk about today's program, so first we will have some words of welcome, both from our host, the Estonian Academy of Sciences, and the Ministry of Environment. And then we will have 4, I hope, short presentations, about 20 minutes each. After which we will close the seminar with a short panel about possible cooperation and roles of national and global biodiversity portals. And not to keep you any longer, I would like to invite up here Mr. Jaak Järv, who is the Secretary General of the Estonian Academy of Sciences. Thank you.
Dear participants, ladies and gentlemen, I am very glad to welcome you in this nice building in the case of your fantastic symposium. And just to have a few words for introduction, I would just say that development of internet has changed dramatically our world. It has changed economy, politics, and of course science. And if you remember the open access movement that started from declaration of Stanford University library people, has also changed the way we publish science data. Of course, initially we had illusions. Now it will be free, completely free, but actually we observed that business, a huge scientific publication business, has still remained a business even within open access model. But still a lot of things have been changed, because now we can see that data are still more available, and the hierarchy of journals and important journals and less important journals is now disappearing, because if you can read everything in internet, there is no reason to go to library, and libraries, of course, subscribe the best journals, as librarians think. So democracy is coming out from this movement for sure. And now if we are talking about data portals, like your today's event and the whole symposium, then we have to say that the situation with data portals is a little bit different than open access publications, because data portals are often supported, and very well supported, by national scientific science funding organizations, by governments, by European Commission, the infrastructure program and so on. And this means that a lot of public money is put in, and the element of business is not so evident in this case. And this is good, because we must have information, local and global information, because environment is changing, and we have to be informed about these changes and to follow these trends, because this may be vitally interesting in one day. As you know, Estonian e-biodiversity portal is now 10 years already in function. This is quite a long time, and this portal fits very well with our imagination or image or vision about Estonia as an e-state. As we are staying or living inside of this e-state, we know exactly where it's a really e-state, where it's a virtual e-state, where it's just a vision. But I can tell you that this biodiversity e-portal is really existing. It's a real, it's not virtual reality, but it's real data bank, huge, important data bank. And such data banks are created by people. And therefore, I would say that Estonian science and Estonian Academy of Sciences, we are really proud of people who have worked a lot to put together this database, this portal. So I'm using this opportunity to say thanks to all these people who have been involved in this business and this data portal creation. I have heard that some politician has expressed an idea. I don't know was this in Estonia, probably not. But if we have polls, the results always lie. If we have statistics, the results may lie. But if we have big data, the results never lie. It's a beautiful basis for your science. And once more, I wish you a nice ending of this symposium. You were awarded with fantastic weather. And I hope that if you are leaving from Tallinn, you will have good memories from this event and this place. So, thank you.
Thank you, Jaak. And now I will ask Margit Martinson, the Deputy Secretary General of the Ministry of Environment, to share some thoughts with us.
Yes. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's my real privilege to welcome all of you today seminar on behalf of Ministry of Environment. Today's seminar on global and national biodiversity data portals is well-timed as we just opened annual Nature Conservation Month yesterday. This year focus is on nature and health. My overall message today is that two seemingly different and competing areas, nature and digital society, are actually complementing each other and creating more synergy. As you know, Estonia is a small country with only 1.3 million people. So we have to constantly seeking a new ways of doing things with limited resources. And it's not easy. One hand, we believe that developing smart digital solutions can reduce costs and create new opportunities. And really, I can assure you, we really like to use e-services, even when we want to, I don't know, pay for a Christmas tree from National Forest or fishing card. On the other hand, we are very proud of our pristine nature, and we have a special connection with it. Over 50% of our land is covered with forest. 30% of it's under protection. 80% of Estonian land area and 26% of water area has been taken under protection. Estonia biodiversity is one of the richest. Estonia provides, for example, Estonia provides attractive habitat for over 300 species of birds, or 76 species were detected in 1 square meter in the Laelatu wooded meadow. We have been consistently gathering data on environment in Estonia for more than 150 years. Data is, in general, is the basis for information, knowledge, and wisdom. We create and collect an unimaginable amount of data in every minute, and it only grows. Data could be seen as a resource, I don't know, maybe as a gold or water, and data is more valuable when it's shared. It's really important when it's shared. Estonians are great believers in free movement of data and developing e-services on the basis of digital available data. Digital available information enables to make knowledge-based decisions and contribute to transparency about the state of the environment. Collaboration based on data sharing is not limited by physical borders anymore. With a digital infrastructure, we can use data collectively in a whole new way. Let me commend the people that are working on an international biodiversity data and making this valuable data available. There are over 2 million data records about Estonia in global biodiversity portal. Isn't that amazing? One of our priorities in ministry is to ensure efficient e-services and move towards with open data. Several important nature-related IT projects have taken off in recent years. Since last year, national environmental monitoring data is digitalized and accessible from the comprehensive database called KESE. Of course, we continue to improve and the database and the services it offers. We are currently developing a new portal for biodiversity data called ELME, and we hope to launch it in the beginning of the next year. So we live in an interesting time. Gathering and sharing data globally has never been so simple thanks to digital solutions. So let us make the best possible use of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Margit. And I would also like to add that yesterday we celebrate the month of nature conservation in Estonia. It started yesterday, and also we now, about 6 days from now, we will celebrate the Global Day of Biodiversity. So important milestones coming up. And today is a good day to talk about the global view of what GBIF can contribute to the availability and interoperability of biodiversity data. And for this, I'm glad to have here Mr. Copas from the GBIF Secretariat. Please.
I'll leave it to the professionals. Perfect, thank you. Okay, yeah. I'll start here. If I decide to break into song, I'll probably pick up the other mic. Thank you, Mr. Secretary General, Madam Deputy Secretary General. Congratulations on the Academy's 80th birthday, also celebrated this year, and a time of celebrations, it seems. If I could, I'd like to take one brief personal moment in case he's watching. Today is also the day that my family celebrates the last exam of my 17-year-old in high school. So, Addison, if you're watching, congratulations, and I'll see you soon. So, I'm going to talk today about the services and functions of Global Biodiversity Data Portal. In my way, I can't, I'm given a topic and can't quite stick to it exactly. I think I'd maybe like to talk about this slightly more broadly in terms of infrastructure, because on the one hand, to talk about the data portal, the web presence of the Global Biodiversity Information Facility and its participant nodes, is a limiting way to view this work. And in fact, as Secretary General mentioned, the role of people, actually both of them mentioned, the role of people in this work is critical, right? We may be teaching machines, we may be enabling machine learning, but it's humans who are putting these systems together. Without much more delay, let's maybe see. Yeah. Oh, there we go. All right, I'm going to keep the introductory elements about GBIF and gbif.org to a relative minimum. We are fast approaching the symbolically important, if scientifically, let's say, insignificant milestone of 1 billion species occurrence records in the global index. This is something that provides us with an opportunity to talk about the achievements of the network with a broader population, we think. We're eager to do that and expect that in coming weeks we will have the chance, and we hope that you will join us in celebrating that milestone for what it is and what it does represent, which is, I think, a clear indication that biodiversity has reached this condition of big data, if it hasn't already. Again, the numbers are not a pure representation of those things. You'll see this is the work of a huge number of groups here, and you can look at it a couple of different ways. This is the most formal way, right? This is the formal participant network of GBIF, which includes 55 countries at this point, and another 36 NGOs and other organizations who join us in this work. In some ways, this is the most limiting way to talk about it because, as you'll have noticed on the last slide, we also publish data from nearly 1,200 institutions. So this is a pretty simplified view of it, and you can get a bit more complex view of it if we start to look at the actual data points on the map. Certainly there are places to fill in, and that is something that we collectively are engaged in every day, whether it's bringing in new participants, new publishers, new data sets, and trying to address some of the gaps in this landscape of biodiversity occurrences. My colleague from the Secretariat, for instance, and science officer, has been in Moscow this week, working with a growing network of Russian institutions and individuals from Russian institutions who are mobilizing data and beginning to fill in some of the blank spots on the map there. And we can look at things lots of different ways. This is one of the roles that we have within GBIF. You know, even from a polar projection, you can begin to see, let's see if this works. Maybe not. You can begin to see the bright spot of those some 200 million records from Estonia. I think it's quite clear when we look at things in this representation what an important role our hosts play in assembling this global data in their country, large or small as it may be. But I'll back up a little bit. What are we doing here? What is the actual purpose? In the end, what we're interested in, and that's an unfortunate conjunction of the screens, isn't it, is fair and open data for use and reuse. If you're familiar with the concept of fair, we're talking about findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. This is intended, this entire enterprise of the GBIF network is intended to make these data available freely and openly to anyone in the world, free of charge, for research uses, for policy uses, perhaps for fun on occasion. And we do that by pulling together data from a very wide and heterogeneous range of sources, from natural history collections to field observations, occurrences from literature and on down. And then by using data standards and different interoperable open source software tools, we get that data in the hands of users, where it is applied in a whole range of topics. Anything that needs to answer a research or policy question that hinges on some knowledge of biodiversity on the planet, at least at a species level now, can make use, and in fact does often make use, of data mobilized through this network. Our role then is, one way of looking at it is threefold. We want to remove obstacles to sharing data and to using data. So we want to make it easier for institutions that hold data to share it. We want to make it easier for people who need data in their work and research and policy to have access to it. We provide the means of organizing this regardless of where those records come from in time or space. And in the end, we are really engaged on something that has, for all the novelty of the internet age and information age, it does have its roots in several centuries of natural history collections. We want to provide as rich a possible resource through the internet to the information that's housed in those natural history collections around the world, in Estonia and elsewhere. The primary source for getting at all of this is through our website, gbif.org, which is another place you can watch if you're like my colleagues from the Secretariat and are keen to see when we reach 1 billion. You can go there and refresh it, repeatedly, day in, day out. It will keep popping up. If we go there now, I'm sure these numbers are out of date, having taken this screenshot late last night. We also provide the tools that enable sharing data through this. One important tool, the IPT, or Integrated Publishing Toolkit, is open source software that's used widely around the world and helps us standardize data and present it from all these different sources in ways that are clearly and easily navigable by users. That is a sort of tool primarily, though, for data managers, collections managers. We provide other kinds of tools, some of them large, some of them small. Sometimes we just need to provide sets of detailed utilities for the kinds of tasks that our node managers, many of whom from Europe are here in the room, need to perform routine tasks and processes. We also, within the network, have larger initiatives, some of which are clearly not led by the Secretariat, but generate from the broader community. A number of years ago, the Atlas of Living Australia was lucky enough that a government surplus led to an influx of funding. So in 2 years, they had to think about what they would build for a biodiversity data management system if they were given $50 million Australian. This is more akin to an internet startup than the pace at which someone in a government research institution generally operates. We don't operate on those levels of funding typically. But to their credit, in 2 years' time, they produced a state-of-the-art enterprise-level system that after it was sort of out into the wild, as you might say, their own systems were up and running, and other members of our network began to see its capabilities. It has been adopted widely across the network. More than a dozen countries are now running installations based on this system, which we're now broadly referring to as living atlases. And in fact, one of them also may be familiar to some of you people in the room. With the Secretariat, we also try to coordinate larger activities that are of particular interest to the community. We don't need to lead these things for them to happen. We can use the power of the network and our own position among different research infrastructures and projects and partners to help coordinate around services that can be shared more broadly by a range of stakeholders. So for instance, the so-called Catalog of Life Plus initiative that's underway now is really about trying to provide a consistent and reliable global taxonomic service that many of the partners around this can contribute pieces to, and in turn also make use of these services. This is critical for helping us understand changes in science, some of them driven by technology, some of them simply driven by research of various kinds, from traditional taxonomy to work such as the work that's being pioneered here in Estonia around genomic identification of taxa. We provide a number of other tools and means of accessing this data. Not everything has to go through the website. We provide a robust API which allows people to access information and allows, more importantly, machines to access information in clearly structured semantic ways so that, again, we can use the power of big data to run the kinds of analyses and answer larger questions that were not possible to answer before. And this looks in, for any user, particularly for any technologist, this sort of structure, you can see this is structured information. We ourselves make use of the API. The GBIF Secretariat makes use of this API in presenting our own website. So we feel that it's important that we ourselves are confident in the service and its robustness and its flexibility and capacity to represent the knowledge that runs through the network. There are other tools that are available to do different operations, different analyses, most of them open source. There are some important ones that are developed by a group called R Open Science that really begins to look at distribution patterns and distribution modeling and larger analytical questions. We can then, if we sort of scale down to look at how we can improve this overall portal, we are trying continually to improve how we represent things and also to show how we interpret data in the index. So simply from an individual record, there are lots of these same sort of fields that you would have seen a couple of slides ago from that snippet of code. This is an interpreted view, and simply by clicking the little toggle at the top right below the green bar, you can actually begin to see, all right, so in the second column, we have an interpreted view. What did it actually say in the database? If someone comes even down to the level of an individual record, they may think that there is something wrong with it. It provides a quick means of at least beginning to see if the problems are of data, the problems are perhaps one of science, maybe the taxon that it's identified has changed. But we want to try to be as transparent in this as we are in the rest of our operations, in the information that we present. We can always improve this. So, talking about data interpretation, we know that it's currently the case that several of these systems, all of these systems, let's be honest, index and ingest data in their own processes, right? So at the top and bottom here, we have just a quick representation of how the Atlas of Living Australia software and the GBIF software currently process information. And the part that's highlighted revolves around data validation and also then data cleaning and interpretation. We know that both of these systems, despite all of the ways that they operate well together, do things differently. And so for users of each of their services, they may see the same record in one system with issues that are flagged or concerns raised about the interpretation or some aspect of the information that are interpreted differently or represented differently than they are in the other one. So currently we're in the process of re-engineering this ingestion system so that we can have consistent processing of all of these data, whether it's parsing, interpretation, flagging of issues, regardless of the system. So that by the end of this year, we expect that there will be, in essence, or virtually speaking, let's say, a single ingestion process for data that comes in through GBIF or comes in through the Atlas of Living Australia. These will be represented in the same way. They'll function on the same code base. And by designing this in an extensible way, we've also left the door open for other entities, other systems to perform the same kinds of operation. We think this is really important, an important step, one that maybe won't be seen by people who are coming to, let's say, to the websites for fun or out of some personal interest in biodiversity. But for those people who are making use of the data in large-scale analyses, this is an important step in the evolution of the overall data processing. So, why are we doing all this? It's not as someone has once been told by a grant reviewer, it's not an archivist project. It is about application. And we are seeing this trend continue to grow. One of the things that the Secretariat does is maintains a literature tracking program, looking at peer-reviewed research and also gray literature, other books, all scientific literature, to try to see where the data are used. We're particularly interested in those use cases, right? So the chart you see at the top right represents peer-reviewed substantive uses of GBIF-mediated data, that is data that has come through gbif.org over the past 10 years. And you can see there is a steady trend. While this year we're a bit behind our pace from last year and perhaps may fall short, it's been a big month already this month, and we're averaging just under 2 peer-reviewed uses of data in each and every day of the year. We think that's significant, and we also think that it's great value for money for the governments that have funded this enterprise. So one of the stories that we'll be keen to tell on the occasion of this 1 billion milestone. And again, this covers an entire range of topics, not just nature conservation, species conservation, protected areas. It includes ecology, evolution, biogeography, and into other areas, again, where it's important to understand where organisms have been, where they are now, and where they will be in the future. Whoops, wrong one. So I just want to show quickly then that we are also keen to give credit where credit is due. The way that we represent individual data sets is intended to give a number of tools to data publishers, those institutions that are willing to share data. At a summary level, the first page of a data set, we also want the users to understand what this data represents quickly. We provide some visual cues about the kinds of characteristics and qualities of the data set. Here we're talking about collections from a natural history, presume a herbarium within it, yeah. Although if we look, there's a stray 2 animals somehow in this data set. Because they're specimens, it may be no surprise that only a quarter of them come in with coordinates assigned, but you can see the rest of the information is quite solid and quite comprehensive. We want to record and present back how is this data being accessed. So we maintain a log of all all downloads made by users that contain data from a given data set. This data set has been in for several years now, and so we're closing in on 14,000 different downloads have included data from the Tallinn Botanic Garden. We also, going back to this idea of tracking research uses, as long as we can change the culture of data citation, we now have in place a rather automated system for recording uses of biodiversity data through this infrastructure. When users download data, they're assigned that download is assigned a DOI. If I go back one, you'll see that. Each of these downloads has an individual digital object identifier. And if that is cited in research, we can actually link it back to individual papers. In the case, as well as data sets, as well as publishers. In this case, we're talking about the Tallinn Botanic Garden. There's 16 papers out in the world that have used DOIs to identify the fact they've used data from this data set. And what's more, we can list them. And if we look at this first one here, which happens, by the way, to be the 3,000th peer-reviewed data use paper from GBIF's history. You can begin to see, you can even come back and look at what the research question probably is or imply what it is. You can certainly come back and redo the analysis. This is about openness and transparency, and this is a relatively simple one. We're looking at plant records from Norway that have coordinates without issues, right? So a reasonable data set. That DOI appears one time in that paper, and we can track it back not only to the institution, but also to the data set. And I just was looking before we came, yeah, so, and then you can get into that detail. There's 16 records out of those 5 million that actually came from that data set. Now, this may not be particularly surprising in the case of a paper that's looking in plants in Norway, but those 16 citations from the Tallinn Botanic Garden range much farther. There are Estonian researchers that have used it and published it in papers. Researchers from Ukraine, Russia, many countries in Europe. But when that data was originally shared, it was probably not expected that researchers in Turkey, Uzbekistan, Oman, Thailand, New Caledonia, Pakistan would be making use of that same data. This is a powerful example of making use of digital tools to understand the links between data sharing and research. Opens up lots of different paths for reinterpretation, validation, assessment. And it is something that GBIF is quite advanced in compared to other research infrastructures. So we cover lots of other things in the website. We provide documentation and guidance to the nodes. We cover different projects that are focused on capacity enhancement, sometimes regionally, sometimes in the case of the Secretariat's own funding mechanism, focused on funding for participants around the world to work together on a range of different kinds of efforts, including in this case a research project looking at their own activities in relation to European biodiversity reporting mechanisms. We support interpersonal knowledge exchange through training programs and also mentoring, which has come out of an EU-funded project to mobilize data for research and policy in Africa, the Caribbean, and the Pacific. We're actually eager to see whether this provides opportunities, similar opportunities in Europe for European funding. So any of you who have ideas about approaching that, I'm available after the meeting. And then I want to come back to people, right? There is a formal role for people within the GBIF network around collaboration and governance. The nodes meeting that's been hosted here in Tallinn this week is part and parcel of that. But it gives also an entire range of opportunities for the individuals involved to develop their own leadership and professional skills. And these are the people that I've had the pleasure of spending the past couple of days with here in Tallinn. And thank you for letting me join you. So to wrap up, these investments in infrastructure do have a range of different uses. I'm very eager to hear the discussion from the next speakers to talk about specific roles of collections-based portals and national-based portals. But we think that it's quite clear that that investments in each of these areas return benefits to the entire enterprise and add up to more than the sum of its parts. And I want to end with one example, actually, where the global infrastructure maybe enables this kind of use of data, but it is unlikely that it would ever really be the kind of thing supported at a global scale. Our esteemed node manager and head of delegation from the Irish node knows about this example. This is simply and there are lots of these in Ireland for one reason or another I won't go into, but it's simply a residential development here. That's a really unfortunate break. All right, so. So this is from an ecological impact assessment for a planned neighborhood in County Clare in Ireland, not exactly a metropolis. But as a matter of course, they have consulted the National Biodiversity Data Center, the Irish node that publishes data also from its national portal, also into the global index. And this is being made, having an impact at a local scale in ways that certainly were not envisioned when this global infrastructure was set up. So well done to the Irish and all the rest of the national participants. Thanks.
Thank you, Kyle, and I'm also very eager to hear what is the added value for European and national portals. This was a very comprehensive overview and very advanced actions that you take both on the digital, horizontal, and community activities. So thank you for that. And now, please, from the Pan-European Research Infrastructure Initiative, DISCO, welcome Dimitris Koureas. Thanks.
Thank you very much, and thanks, Kyle, for the very interesting presentation of GBIF. So, in anticipation of the 1 billion records from data mediated from GBIF, let's talk a bit about basically one big part of how that data came together, which is the natural science collections. The other way. So, I'm going to say a few words about, of course, the value of natural science collections today in the world. And of course, natural science collections, as you know, they've been the result of more than 400 years of intensive scientific activity globally. They basically represent a planetary library of ecological, taxonomic, genomic, and chemical information, unprecedented and not replicable. So basically, what we have with that huge investment from the natural science collections needs to return its investment. We need to see how we can benefit more from this investment that we've made over the last 400 years from both private and public resources. When I talk about research infrastructure, probably most of the minds of people, at least in the public sphere, go in things like this. So this is one of the experiments in CERN. But what we're trying to say here is basically that this represents an equally important and actually much more expensive investment of research infrastructures. And there is no better proof of the value of those investments over the years, but if you see actually the distribution of those natural science collections globally. There is no big city or country, of course, in the world that does not host a natural science collection facility. And the reason of that distribution is because all of those natural science collections, they've been fundamental in supporting biodiversity discovery and geodiversity discovery for all of these 400 years. And this is why each one of those countries and each one of those cities invested in developing and maintaining them. So what is different today? What are we trying to do today? Isn't that enough? Isn't that an adequate model? Well, it used to be for many years, of course. But now, as the changes, as we heard earlier about the fundamental changes the internet brought, basically, the challenges that we have to address cannot be addressed through the fragmentation of those collections. And Europe plays a critical role. Don't ask me why, you probably know, but Europe represents approximately 55% of the world's collections. And within European collections, we have specimens that represent 80% of the global biodiversity. That's fantastic. That's a huge, huge asset that we need to be investing in. We've been working collectively as European natural science collections for many years. Collectively, we employ more than 5,000 people, full-time. That's a very big number for a research infrastructure. We have more than 16,000 people every year moving from country to country to visit those collections and study them. Together, we have more than 10 million public visitors and more than 25 million visitors in our different data portals. So these are very impressive numbers that we need to build on. So this is where DISCO comes in. DISCO is a new pan-European initiative for developing a research infrastructure within the ESFRI context, the European Strategy Forum on Research Infrastructures. And basically what it's trying to do, its vision, is to position natural science collections at the very heart of scientific innovation, not only for biodiversity and geodiversity, but for bioeconomy and other societal challenges. And of course, our mission, how we would like to do that, is by mobilizing, unifying, and basically delivering bio and geodiversity information at the form, the scale, but most importantly, the precision, the quality that only natural science collections can provide. To that end, I'm happy to say that we have today the largest ever agreement between natural science collections globally to basically transform themselves into a unified organization that sees collections as if they were one asset, one European level asset, scientific asset. 114 institutions, natural science collections and collection holding institutions across 21 European countries. And it's not only the agreement to actually collaborate, it's the agreement to completely change their business models, the way they do things within the organization so that they can accommodate this vision. So DISCO builds on three main pillars: data, policies, and probably most importantly, people and the skills they have. If we disconnect expertise from the infrastructures, you end up with empty shells. So for DISCO, expertise, and specifically expertise linked to the collections, is fundamental, is integrative to the value of the system. And of course, policies as well. It's about how we do things in a harmonized, synchronized way. Otherwise, you cannot talk about a unified European organization. And these are access policies as well, the way we allow and enable people to access our resources, virtually, but also physically. And if you talk about data, and of course, all of that, as I said before, for science, industry, and society. So if you talk about data, and if we see the landscape today, the global landscape about the different data classes, the different data that we have been extracting out of the study of the collections, of course we have very, very successful examples. I would of course start with GBIF, a fantastic resource, one of the most successful we have globally about bringing together occurrence information from those collections across other sources of information as well. Taxonomic resources, genomic information, traits, nomenclature, literature, species interactions. And at a global scale, we have initiatives that actually are trying to bring these data classes together. Some more successful than others. But the need has been recognized and some of the investments are already there. What we're still missing is the capacity to actually link that information together. Provide a knowledge graph actually of all of that information together. And for DISCO, what we are trying to do is use a fundamental and unambiguous point, which is the collection object itself. The collection object is actually the object that all of those data classes that we're studying have derived from. So you can bring them all back by linking back to that collection object. So linking all of that, which is linkable, it's one of the missions of DISCO in that landscape. And you will see here that we're moving a bit away of using the taxonomic names as the anchoring point, right? We retain taxonomy as a layer of interpretation rather than as a fundamental point of linking all that information together. And this is something that collections can do, unlike other sources of biodiversity information. And by doing that, they can actually ensure quality because provenance and validation is always possible going back to that physical object. So DISCO is actually destined to provide 3 different classes of services to the scientific communities. One we call the e-science services, a set of discovery, access, analysis, and interpretation services for the information mobilized out of those collections. A set of services that are around physical and remote access. As I said before, we have 16,000 people moving from country to country every year studying this collection. This needs to be balanced with actually the capacity to provide digital access. And needs to be better organized and coordinated. And of course, support and training services. Without them, without enhancing the skills and capabilities of people to cope with the rest of those services, again, you end up with just an empty promise. So we're talking about a completely different business model. A business model where researchers are moving in countries or are accessing, where possible, of course, virtually information where it's aggregated, to a model where basically all of those collections become one European asset. And then they provide services to both researchers, but equally important to other research infrastructures. And because that is the link that will allow us in the future to go into cross-disciplinary answering of questions. And we're lucky enough in Europe to have a very interesting landscape of how these research infrastructures are being developed. I'm not going to describe that, but these are the main 7 points of the added value, let's say, of DISCO. What could we not do before, and what we could do with? And basically, you will see that apart from the linking of the information, the unified access, the cross-disciplinarity, I would like to talk about the economies of scale that we can create. Sometimes it's not only about asking for more money, it's about what you can do best with the money you have. And basically, DISCO comes into that space as well, into creating these economies of scope and scale that allow to achieve better efficiencies in the way we invest in our collections. It's also about making sure that the collections are not further developed in isolation, but basically they are developed in the wider context of the European priorities, but also the global priorities. I cannot see any more institutions developing their collections in a model where they just look at taxonomic, geographical, or temporal gaps in their collections, even at national level. We need to see that at a global scale, We need to be able to deploy specialization strategies for our collections, but we need to do that only in the global context. And the only mechanism to do that is by understanding how our collections, our institutions' collections, fit within that global landscape. And of course, it's about, there used to be an animation in this one, but there used to be a loop there. But basically, this is one of the examples we expect to have in terms of how we see collections basically being used for societal challenges. This is one of the examples, the invasive and alien species. Full economic cost today for the European countries is 20 billion euros per year. All right? That's the full economic cost if you take into account all aspects of that. Biodiversity-wise, biodiversity loss, and also ecosystem services. This is a huge amount of money. All right? So basically, to be able to respond to these big questions, we need to do that at the scale that is required, and that scale can only be achieved when we have that information linked at the level of aggregation needed. So the loop here was that, of course, you start with facilities and collections, you link information not only within collections, but also using information from other research infrastructures, and of course you provide analysis and interpretation services to scientific communities able to go back and address some of those needs. So DISCO runs in the wider context of European research infrastructures. That animation worked. But basically this is a very simplified way of research infrastructure, environmental research infrastructures in Europe at least, and coming from the ENVRI cluster community of environmental research infrastructures, you will see that DISCO basically is destined to occupy a very foundational layer of data, of reference information, that is providing then services to other research infrastructures within the European landscape. And you will see some known names within the environmental landscape there, like LTR and of course LifeWatch. So DISCO doesn't comes as a supplement, as a very important piece of the puzzle to those research infrastructures that already operate within Europe. And of course, funding. For those of you who are familiar with research infrastructures in Europe, you will find this slide very familiar as well. But institutional level, national level, and European level are basically the three levels of funding that we usually approach in this kind of research infrastructures. The national level is highlighted because this is the main source of funding. Institutional funding and European level funding are basically seed and facilitating resources, but the heavy bulk of the investment comes at national level. So basically, we need to actually be persuasive enough and convincing enough to our funders at national level. And this is a very interesting discussion. DISCO is going to happen as a collation of different projects, right? These projects come together and they develop components and elements of the research infrastructure. We expect to become operational by 2025. That means providing end-user services as I described them before. To that road, 2025, you will see several projects in the pipeline. Some of them have been already funded. Some of them are in the pipeline. Some of them are still to be developed. And you will see some known acronyms in there probably. But what is also very important is to understand that all of those projects come now for the first time at the European level under a common coordination. A coordination that brings together all the people that actually run these projects at the same table to be able to prioritize activities, refine priorities, and basically make sure that we maintain the right level of agility on how we do things within our projects so that we can develop the pieces of the puzzle. This is my last slide. I was specifically this slide basically built to address some of the issues regarding and the opportunities regarding the collaboration opportunities that we have at national and European level. And of course, we all start from the institutional level, organizational level, a sub-country level with museums, university, and research centers revolving around that space. And then we've seen developing at national level activities at the node level. Of course, you all here, or some of you here represent GBIF nodes at national level. We have LifeWatch nodes, for example, and we have now DISCO nodes, the DISCO national task forces. And if you remember, as I said before, national funding is the main source of funding for these research infrastructures. And we need to be more convincing on how we approach our national funders. We need to be more convincing on how we need to converge our activities at national level so that we can go back to the funders and present ourselves as a more holistic value proposition that actually can be invested. So, and of course then you have the European level, where the priorities become a bit different. They become more scientific. They become priorities about specific communities of practice. And how all of these actually are interoperating is a very interesting discussion. And finally, you have a global level, where you have infrastructures that actually play a more thematic role around bringing information together at global scale. Now, the pathways that actually link all of those together is something that we need to be discussing, not only on the vertical, but also on a horizontal level. And I hope that my presence here at the GBIF nodes, European GBIF nodes meeting, is actually an incentive to start discussing this in a meaningful way. So, this is a very basic description of DISCO. Just to summarize, we see DISCO as a key scientific asset today and a potential extremely useful research infrastructure with end-user services for the entire community. The only way for this to happen is if everyone understands that they are actually part of DISCO. Everyone who is relevant to at least natural science collections. And for us, this is extremely important. For those of you who know DISCO, you know it's being driven by a very small team, at least in coordination-wise, but with hundreds of people that actually have been doing a lot of work behind it across the continent. And one fundamental difference that I would like to highlight finally is the governance. We usually do not pay a lot of attention to that, but governance and how we actually come together, the agreements, the terms of reference by which we collaborate are extremely important. And DISCO differentiates because it's not just a project, it actually mandates a completely different business model on how our natural science collections operate together. So, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dimitris, and it was very good to see all the added value that DISCO can give the European community and already has been giving through different Horizon 2020 projects, for example, Iceland, and we all see the coordination effects within Estonia also. And I should mention that Estonia is also a member of the DISCO proposal with 3 research universities and the Estonian Natural History Museum. And also we submitted the DISCO proposal into the national roadmap, so we're trying also from our side to be as active as possible and hope that Estonia will one day be a member of the DISCO ESPRI network. But now, moving a little bit down to the national levels, we will have 2 quick examples of biodiversity networks and portals working on a national level. And first up is the Netherlands, and Wouter Addink from Naturalis Center will have the floor, please.
The landscape of biodiversity portals online is very diverse, and that is because there are different users and many different use cases. So there are several different approaches to biodiversity portals. And before going more in detail on national data portals, I want to give you a quick overview of these different approaches that there are. And each of these approaches serves their own purpose. So we have information portals, and in several countries you see that this is being established by the CBD clearinghouse mechanisms, for instance, which are websites that provide information on national biodiversity strategies and how the field is organized in terms of organizations dealing with biodiversity information, etc. We have portals that supply not individual data records, but data sets as a whole that you can download and use for your research purposes. An example is the European portal to support the EU directive on the use of public sector information. And then we have data portals, and there we can also see different kinds of data portals. We have thematic data portals, we have international data portals like the GBIF portal that you have seen, and we have these national data portals that I will talk more about, and also thematic portals. Portals that have been created by individual natural history museums, etc. You see also portals that are focusing on reporting by citizen science. A new kind of portals that you now see emerging is portals where you can directly do your research and analysis of data. So it's not about discovery of data, but you have the data already and you want to do analysis. And you have portals that report the current status and the threats in a country, invasive species, etc. To show you a few examples on how diverse the landscape is, here are a few examples. We have the Arctic Biodiversity Data Service, which is a thematic portal. IDIF Biodiversity Data Portal, which is a portal for researchers involved in the project to manage their data mainly. Another example is the Flora of Cyprus portal, which is a national flora. A Bulgarian biodiversity portal, which is a portal with information about how the organization is in the country. A data analysis portal in Sweden, and a data portal in France. So these are just a few examples to show how diverse it is. We have national data portals, we have global data portals, we have also several portals in Europe. So, and these are a few examples of European data portals. What you see is that most of these European portals and also the global biodiversity portals, they are usually available only in English language. The only exception here is the BioCase Europa portal, which is also one of the oldest ones, which is available in 11 languages. That portal is focusing on collection and observation data. And the UBON, European Biodiversity Portal, is more ambitious and more recent project-based portal that shows observations and ecological data and wants to show trends in occurrences and in distribution. We have a freshwater biodiversity portal, so that's a thematic portal for Europe, for all the freshwater in Europe. We have a biodiversity information system for Europe, which is targeted to show data about the targets in Europe for halting the biodiversity loss. And we have the European Nature Information System, which is about protected species in Europe and protected areas. I looked specifically for national portals in Europe, and I found 17 portals. So 17 countries in Europe have a national data portal. It's quite difficult to find these portals sometimes, so there may be more, and maybe I have missed some. To give you an example of how difficult it is to find these portals sometimes, and this is just an example, but you can do that for every country. So I was interested here to find whether there is biodiversity data for France available online. So I simply searched in Google for biodiversity data France. And in the results I found one link that seems interesting. It's about a news item from 2015 that GBIF France launches a new national data portal for biodiversity. Okay, so that's maybe what I'm interested in. So I go to that link and then I see that news item and I see a screenshot. I say, oh, okay, but I want to go to the data portal itself. Well, luckily there is a link on that page to Atlas of Living France. So that's probably the portal I'm looking for. So I click on that. And then I end up with a demo portal. So, okay, I think, well, maybe it's not developed yet in France. So apparently there's only a demo portal available yet for France. This is not the case. There is a very nice portal in France. But this is just an example to show how difficult it is for an ordinary user sometimes to find this. I think this is quite easy to solve, by the way, so we have to put more focus on that. So 17 out of 51 countries in Europe have a national data portal, about 1/3. If you look at GBIF participant countries, then you see that there is a clear a link between participating in GBIF and having a national data portal. Because you see that about 60% of the GBIF participants also have a national data portal. Where out of the countries that are not participating in GBIF, only 16% have a national data portal. And most of these national data portals has some involvement of GBIF nodes. So we have seen that very nice global biodiversity data portal from GBIF. So why do we still need national data portals? I did not an extensive survey, but I've talked with a few providers of these national data portals, and I heard some arguments here. An argument that you hear very often is that they want to have a data service in their national languages, and GBIF currently is only in English, although GBIF is planning to have their portal available also in more languages. So is this actually true? I looked into how many of these portals have multiple languages, and I discovered that indeed 47% have a portal in their national language and in English. So apparently people want to serve these portals also to an international community. And 35% have national portals only in their national language. And only 70%, so there's still a few national portals that have a portal available only in English, while their national language is not English. Another argument that you hear often is that they see the audience for these portals as a national society as a whole. So they see the GBIF portal more as a portal for science and for scientists, where they want to serve also the general public and citizen science. So if that's the case, then you would expect that you have functionality in the portal, like a very nice interface and common name searches, etc. So I looked into the common name search and I found that a little bit more than half of these portals have common name functionality, which is not present in GBIF portal at the moment. And also another argument that you hear is that they say, well, we want to provide more geographic detail and more layers of geographical data that are specific for our country, like the national parks in our country, and that's not available in GBIF. So I looked into that as well, and you see here a few examples that indeed most of these portals provide quite advanced map services actually. with several layers that are specific for the country. Another argument that you often hear is, well, we need a portal to show our capacity. So we want to show our funders what the progress is in mobilizing our data and what the data use is. But this is apparently quite difficult to do because you see only 25% of the portals that have a specific functionality for that. And what I think that we maybe see in the future is that we make more and more use of the functionality of global portals that can provide this complex functionality to use in the national portals. Other arguments that you hear is, well, we have a national data infrastructure in place, and that's the hard thing to do. And because we have that in place already, it's relatively easy to provide a national data portal on top of that. Sometimes you also hear interesting that, well, if we are a GBIF node and we have a responsibility for a national portal, then we ensure that we have enough ICT capacity to also do our small ICT things that are very important. So a short overview of biodiversity portal functions. We have very diverse national data portals, but in the basis you see that almost all these portals provide some simple text search, which can either be a scientific name search or a free text search. They also all have some advanced text search, and they have very different approaches for that. But to serve a wider group of users, you almost always need that. They all support spatial search, so maps where you can search and view the data. So we have seen that most of them also provide common name services and provide an interface in different languages. And then you have a wide range of other functionality that you can see in these portals. And I think that depends mainly on what is seen as the main functionality of these portals, because some of these portals focus only on specimen and observation data, while other portals want to make a combination with species data in their country, with citizen science reports, with threat status, etc. So you see all these other functionality as well, multimedia, images, video, sounds, sometimes APIs, not so many actually, which I found surprising because quite often these portals are built on top of a national data infrastructure, so they are built on top of an API. But they don't specifically make that API available for researchers so that they can use the data directly in their analysis tools yet. And a good example of a country that's very much focusing on an API and has less focus on a national portal is the Netherlands. Sometimes you see functionality for browsing taxonomy, bibliographic information, DNA sequences, specialists, etc. What I didn't find, but maybe it's there, but maybe I just overlooked it, is a temporal search. So you see name-based search, you see search on spatial, so on where species occur, but searches in time. Apparently it's something that's difficult to achieve. We know that it's important, but you don't see much functionality for that yet in national portals. Things like measurement tools and traits, also not present. GBIF portal currently also have national country pages. And these country pages are more or less a mix between some node information, so information about the national node, and data from the country and data about the country, so data itself. A list of publications, so data that has been used, national data in publications. And what's very interesting, I think, is that the GBIF provides these data publishing trends. So that was functionality that many people say it's important for our ministries and our funders, but it's difficult to provide, and GBIF provides that. And so I think we will see more and more, and I think Estonia is already doing that, that national portals just incorporate that functionality from the GBIF portal. A quick overview of the usage software. What we see is that in the past, every country had their own software development, and we are going more and more towards a situation that we have one or more tools that are open source and praised by the community, and that are implemented in multiple countries. And the main tool at the moment, and you heard about that already in the GBIF presentation, is the ALA portal. And we see that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 countries currently implementing an ALA portal already, and a number of countries has planned to do that. But we also see some other solutions used on public software. We have the portal in Estonia, Pluto F-based, if I can say that. We have a Netherlands Biodiversity API-based solution in the Netherlands. And we have a CCAN-based solution in Belgium. And CCAN is a solution for not serving individual data records, but data sets. So what would be the ideal situation in a country? And I don't know, but I see a few components, and you can separate these components in separate portals, but you can also combine them, that you probably will want to have in your country. So you want to have a portal with general information about the organizational structure in your country, projects in your country, how you implement EU regulations, etc. For instance, that can be a CBD clearinghouse mechanism site. You want to have data available about the species occurring in your country, together with the status, with the change in occurrences, with reports about that. Reporting mechanisms for citizen science, etc. And you also want to have these data portals that you can search directly in the data for primary biodiversity data, so facts and measurements. The difference between species portals and data portals is that species portals have a focus on the country itself, so it's data about the country and about the species in the country. Where a data portal is about the data that's available in the country, the data that's created in the country. And that data is usually about the whole world. And that's the reason that these two functionalities are sometimes difficult to combine. And in several countries, you see that they have several portals for that. For instance, in Norway, in Sweden, in the Netherlands, they have a different portal for species information. A species portal is usually also information that is being compiled by people. It's not just the bare facts, but it has been compiled in reports, in distribution maps, etc. And then you have these data sets, and for these data sets there is an infrastructure in place already. We have the GBIF infrastructure, of course, but we also have the European data portal.eu, and there are national open data set portals for public sector open data. So it's not only about biodiversity, but biodiversity data could also be supplied in that as public sector open data sets. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Wouter. And as we are running a little bit behind schedule, the time for questions will be during the panel. And I think one underlying problem to the funding and co-work of the national and global portals is that for scientific purposes, the data needs to be available and globally, but for environmental awareness and certain nature conservation activities, the focus is more on local and national actions. So we need to find a way to achieve a balance and serve both purposes. And also it's a little bit easier to fund national portals also, both politically and in administrative purposes, but that also needs to change for scientific-driven portals and research initiatives. But now an overview of the Estonian Biodiversity Network and portal. Professor Urmas Kõljalg, please.
Thank you, Vallo. So I will take you to the short journey now, and we will, yes, from space to the ground, so to say. So I'm talking about how it happened that we have now, for 10 years, data portal and new data portal. Actually, it opened a few days ago, but this is the day we celebrate. Backwards. Good. All right, this is how it looks now, new portal. It's not anymore BlueTF based. It's also Atlas of Living Australia software based. But most data are coming from BlueTF platform and from Estonian Ministry of Environment. So they open data for this portal as well. So this is. But I also recognize today that we have 3.1 million occurrence records, but when you go to the GBIF, you see 2.3 species occurrence records for Estonia. So we will look for the why this is happening. I think I know more or less many data, sequence data maybe. You're holding it back until 1 billion. Oh, you got it. All right. Actually, it was, interesting journey for me. So I was looking back to history during a few days, and I saw that 2001, we actually met labs, European labs and American labs in Sweden, in Lund. And we were facing, especially ecologists, but also taxonomists and some bioinformaticians, we were facing major problem because we were studying fungal-plant interactions, and we were using more and more molecular methods. And we had a real problem because we were unable to identify those creatures, especially fungi, inside plant roots or close to the roots in soil. So we decided we need to build data sets, including different data types. Specimens, voucher specimens in public collection, scientific living specimens, molecular data, traits, and reference-based occurrence data, and of course taxonomic backbone. So, and we were international community, so we decided we need online platform so that we can collectively edit, manage, and share those data sets, and in the end product will be service for ourselves and maybe also publicly for identification and communication of DNA-based species. And so we developed this platform. It looks like this now, and it was growing and growing somehow. And in the end, when we came to the point that we wanted to communicate those DNA-based species, because quite soon it was possible to identify them, but then how to communicate when there is no names for those species? So, and then we came up with a solution using digital object identifiers as a stable identifiers instead of full species name. But when full species name comes in, so it takes somehow over, but DOI stays in the system. And of course, we were using major standards just listed here. I will go on. So, but this is the community called Unite, and this is the driving force for this online platform we were developing. And right now, there is collaboration with GBIF and Unite community. And what they are trying to do, they are trying to include now those DNA-based species communicated via DOIs into GBIF taxonomic backbone, which means that when, let's say, from data from next generation sequencing studies are coming into GBIF, they will be either automatically or they are already identified against species communicated with through DOIs. And this means if this pilot project will succeed, it means GBIF will distribute occurrence data on undescribed species. So can you imagine? Occurrence data about undescribed species. And it's a stable system. So let's hope that this community will succeed. But back to the ground. All right, this is how Estonia shows in GBIF portal, and these are data coming from Estonian institutions. So, of course, Estonia is the darkest place on this map, but there are a lot of data published. And there is one thing I want to show you. There was one, and there is one scientist. He's over 80 years old. His name is Tarmo Timm, and he was studying always and still studying aquatic oligohäta, so all kind of worms. And he was working mostly during Soviet time, of course, and so he was collecting all literature published about aquatic oligohäta for Soviet Union and globally as much as possible. So he has in his room huge volume of published papers and printed materials. So he was working for Estonian data portal. So he was mobilizing aquatic oligohäta data from publications for our portal. And at some point he started to talk. He's over 8 years. Oh, I have those tens of thousands publications about Soviet Union written in Russia, in Czech language, all other languages from Middle Asia, Caucasian languages. And I can read them, and I know them, and all data. Can I make global database? We said, yes, go ahead. We didn't know what will happen. And then he was mobilizing all these data from published papers. He was using last 50, 60 years published papers. He was adding coordinates, exact coordinates to the species locations and samples. And then he just published through BlueTF this in GBIF. So, and this data set is downloaded a lot. And right now there is only one citation, but this data set was released less than a year ago. So you can imagine there is already one publication using those data. So I'm calling him over 80 years old scientist, the most famous scientist in Estonia now, because his data are downloaded more and more. So you can see, you can sit at home and work, and he's very happy. So, and this was thanks to this platform, online data management platform developed by Unite community. All right, but at some point, Estonian collection managers, they started to use the same platform because they found out that we are using specimen data in this online platform so that they can use also for their collections. And then bird watchers came in and they found out they can use also. And in the end, there was idea, let's see how many data we have about Estonia and make it available. So, and we made this portal, data portal 10 years ago. So it looked like this, only in Estonia. But we had less than 20,000 species, data for less than 20,000 species at that time. And this is one species some of you know immediately, Arctiagaea, as it looked data, just 2 points on the map. And this looks today the same species now. More people probably recognize it. And this is, of course, software from Atlas of Living Australia, how it looks like. And you can browse different data, calories, and single occurrence records. And most important is now that you can come here and download all data, like you can go to the GBIF homepage. But again, the question, global versus national portals. And what you download, here you will not get the OIs for downloads, and this is, I can see the issue. So, all right, this is the portal. And I also saw on Kyle's slide that he had 3 species more than I have. I made this 2 or 3 days ago, this slide. So you made later a little bit, so we got 3 more species. So basically, we are trying to build Estonian dynamic checklist of species based on data only here, so that we have just scientific data, and they are coming in, and our checklist is growing through this. All right, another feature which I like with Atlas very much is that, and this is I was doing this morning, I was including the name of this house, Estonian Academy of Sciences, and it was automatically found all species occurrences with 1 kilometer radius. So you can imagine you are choosing, let's say, kindergarten, but your children, you ask actually what species are around and if there are wolves, so you have to think about probably. All right, and some statistics, but thank you for my former PhD student. She's the major person behind of Pluto F data management platform. So she became mother in January, so I'm sending greetings to her if she's listening. And I will stop here so that we have to use now time for the discussions. I think it's important. Thank you.
Okay, I think the panelists can now already come up stage. And I will give the floor to Andre Högebert from the GBIF Belgium node, who will moderate the panel session. And we're all curious to find out what are the collaboration opportunities and the added value of different services, both on global and national level. And also congratulations to Urmas personally on the 10th anniversary of the Estonian Biodiversity Protocol. Please, Andre.
So, thank you to Urmas and to the Academy of Science to give me the floor for this panel, which I'm sure will be very interesting. And looking at the presentation, I have a first set of questions, and after these questions being answered, I will give the floor to the audience. So my first question is in fact twofold. We've seen with the Kyle presentation the presentation of this consistent data interpretation combining GBIF and ALA into a single data ingestion process, and I think it's quite important. What do you think? Is it good to have this ingestion be generalized to all the data portal, being at national or regional or global level? And secondly, wouldn't be interesting to have same kind of consistent tracking of the data use in all these portals? So I don't know if Kyle, you want to say something?
Sounds like you're asking that of me. Yes. Well, yeah. The reason I wanted to make the point about the data ingestion pipeline is that on the one hand, it might seem a little esoteric and technical, but we think the implications of this are quite large and quite large for the community, not just for GBIF and ALA and the Living Atlases community. What it does is provide a necessary step to actually think about globally unique identifiers potentially for individual occurrence records. Again, if that sounds too technical or esoteric for you, I'll put a finer point on it. The kind of tracking that we can do now around data sets and publishers based on appearance in research, we could actually track back to individual occurrences. Right now, you know, it happened to be that I showed the DOI that had 16 records from the Tallinn Botanic Garden. And we can click, we can run the same search again and see what records are there. And in the case of an herbarium collection data set, that's likely to not change a lot. You know, if there were a couple more, you could identify when did they come in, perhaps. You may be able to sort of narrow it down. But for citizen science and monitoring data, we can't trace things back to individual records. There's not that level of permanent, consistent, globally unique identifier. We think this is really important for replicability of research, openness, transparency, but it could also be quite interesting for, among others, citizen scientists. It might be a meaningful reward for school children or people who are just picking it up to think that their records are actually contributing to scientific research. We know in a general way that they are at this point, and we can, you know, kind of scope the likelihood in certain ways, some respects. But this is really important, and certainly important in the kinds of things that Dimitris was talking about with DISCO and the role of museum specimens as the sort of hub of all this associated information. So we're quite pleased to see progress being made on that. As far as literature tracking, the system that we have in place is, I think, replicable at a national scale. It is replicable in other areas of research. And in fact, I mentioned, you know, GBIF is quite advanced in this area. It is a working system. We've come up with a technical solution. The challenge is, though, we have to fix the humans. We have to help humans, researchers who are citing data, to take that seriously. We have to work with journal publishers to enforce citation policies, many of which have them on the books. But if we can actually use these consistent identifiers, we can increase the transparency and replicability of science and the openness of open data and its applications. So, you know, all of these things are things that not only can they be replicated, I think it's important that we try to replicate them.
Can I would like to add something from the perspective of DISCO, especially from your first point about the integrated ingestion mechanism that GBIF is developing. I think this is an extremely important aspect because when we started designing DISCO, basically the first idea was, well, first of all, we have a problem about the plurality of the collection management systems right now we have across our organizations, right? The latest survey we ran, we had 100?
Over 100.
Over 100. Across the 114 institutions. Over 100 different implementations on how they actually capture information as a collection management system. There was only 3 or 4 solutions that were used more than once. All right? That was impressive. Now we also asked, how much does it cost you to maintain these solutions? And we came up with 12 million per year. It costs us 12 million per year collectively to maintain these 100 different solutions in our institutions to collect exactly the same data. Right? It's exactly the same type of data we collect as collection management systems in our institutions. And then we ask ourselves when we began, would it make sense to just say, let's propose one that everyone can use. But then we realized that would be almost impossible. The way these institutions are being set up, it's extremely difficult to change how they actually operate and how these solutions are implemented, because it's not the technical part, it's basically the training and all the socio-cultural aspect. In NHM London, we spent 2 years evaluating our collection management system. That was my previous employer. We ended up in a situation where we said, oh yeah, we need to change it, but we cannot. So we're going to stick with it. So basically the whole idea is, unless we develop this kind of ingestion mechanisms, where we can talk to all of those solutions, and basically what we need to be imposing is formats at the point of exit. All right? How you manage your information within your organization is your own concern, and DISCO will not go into that discussion, basically. But how you expose that information, what kind of standards, of course, we use, and we have plenty of them. We don't have to use the same standard, as long as the standards are interchangeable. All right? That's also an important aspect. We don't have to use the same standard, as long as we know we can go from JPEG to PNG. All right? And we know what we lose when we move that into that transition. It's simple as that. So I think that's a very important aspect, and GBIF is leading on that. So I'm very happy to see how we potentially can learn from that experience as well.
Yeah, I have not much to add. Most things have been said already. Yes, of course, it's very important to track the use of our data, because if we can track that, then we can take good decisions on where to put our resources in. In hours that we spend and our focus for our funding, etc. In terms of ingesting data and harmonizing data, this is a process that is very expensive and hard to achieve. So I think, yes, on a national level, we should try to leverage from all the work that's being done on a global level and a European level on that, and try to make use of that infrastructure that's there. And yes, it is true that it does not depend much on what standard you use, as long as you use a standard. Although it helps if you use the same framework for that. So to give a very simple example, let's say that we have data coming into GBIF that has country information, so the country where it originates from. And that country then is provided as a name for the country in different languages, different spellings, etc. So GBIF is harmonizing that to standard language codes. If then another portal also harmonizes that, but to another standardized language code, then still the data scientist has to do some work in data wrangling if he wants to combine data sets from these different portals. If you use the same standards, of course, he will benefit from that, because he can immediately use all these data coming from these different portals together.
Yeah, I fully agree with all the things you already said, and it's tracking, and it's really important. I just would like to go back to a little bit of history and the example of GBIF France and what we did with the Living Atlases community, because it's so I'm Anne-Sophie Archambeau from GBIF France. I'm also the European representative of the GBIF nodes, and on behalf of all of them, I want to thank you, Estonia, for hosting us here. It was really a pleasure. And yeah, to come back to the portals, it's so that following the implementation of the Atlas of Australia, they did a presentation on what they offered, and it's so that when we saw all these modules and possibilities, we were really interested in, and they told us that the code will be open and fully reusable. So we wanted to launch a national portal for all the reasons Wouter presented, the need for national language, the need to access not only for researchers, but also for all the national organizations, NGOs. So we decided to use the module of Atlas of Living Australia, and Spain and France were the first one who implemented them in our national countries. We face issues like language problems. We have accents in our language, they don't exist in English. So we work a lot with this, and we also documented the code because it was shared and free, but it was not really well documented. So we really work all together with Australia, at the beginning Spain and France, to make it more easy to reuse. And after we tried to, we thought that it was a really, really well, we ended with our national portal in Spain and France, and we think that it was really interesting progress, and we wanted to share it with other nodes, try them to implement their national portal really easily. And so we began to make the community growing up, and we organized workshops, training, really close well with Australia. And so now we are really happy to see that there is more than 13 national portals already in production with the Atlas of Living Australia modules. And it's also a question of IT community inside. I think the network inside the GBIF community is really, really important, and it's really helpful. The IT people can talk together, they enrich themselves with the lots of coordination, contribution, exchange, workshop, training, and there is lots of modules. They now can develop new things all together, and for sure we will try, I think, to the tracking system is something we would like to see at national level. And I stop because I talk too much.
Thank you. My second question is regarding the people behind this data and this data portal, being the collectors, the curators, the developers, but also the practitioners or the scientists or the citizen science, all people that are very often not enough visible on this portal. And my question is, how could we give more visibility to the hard work and the effort of these people, especially in the context of the General Data Protection Regulation? Who wants to start? Yeah.
No, I just want to bring a very concrete example for that, because recently a joint working group between RDA and TADWIC concluded its work was specifically on addressing this issue. And it was how we capture and convey information, and we keep the provenance of all the curatorial actions, especially for collections, for example, going back to the physical object and its transformation into the digital surrogate, and basically how we convey and package all of that information so that can be exposed and communicated as part of that final digital object which represents the record. And this group, as I said, it's a joint RDA, the Research Data Alliance and TADWIC group, developed a recommendation that is now under evaluation from the RDA, and it's going to be submitted also in TADWIC, hopefully for formal endorsement and ratification as a new, we'll see if it's going to be a new standard or not. But I think this kind of activities help a lot, but this only addresses the technical part. All right. The main problem is going back to the collections, for example. Is this information captured in the first place somewhere? Because, all right, yeah, if it is captured, we'll find a way to convey that. Is it captured? Because in most of the cases, my experience, at least in the organizations I've worked, is it's not. All right? So how can you make sure that you convey this information, you give credit to people if you do not capture that in the first place? And if you do not maintain the value chain, basically, from the physical object to the digital record. If that link between digital and physical is broken, then the best thing you can do is convey a sterile digital object, digital record, without any ability to go back to the information linked to the physical object itself, whatever that can be. And this is not a technical issue, I'm afraid.
Yeah, having spent 3 days in meetings not thinking about GDPR, thanks for reminding me, Andre. So for our part at GBIF, we are in the midst of laying out exactly what our relationship is to the General Data Protection Regulation. It's not clear as an international network at this point precisely the terms under which we fall or don't. We expect to resolve that in coming days, perhaps weeks. In the meantime, it's quite clear that we have an interest as a network and community in being able to represent human activity around all of these different materials, not necessarily material samples or specimens, but kinds of information. And that includes data sets, publishing institutions, published research, even down to the level of occurrences. And what we are currently investigating is trying to make use of a separate system called ORCID, ORCID, that could provide a means of simplifying the process of making these connections between these different things. It is not intended as a social networking exercise. Instead, we really do want to represent the activities and expertise within the community and do it without establishing some other kind of registry around that kind of information. So we are eager to see, to make it clear that there are humans behind this work in many different ways. It is something that I think historically the community has been relatively poor at. But, as any of you know, being involved in biodiversity information, usually, you're working around people with huge egos. So it is kind of all about them. So it's no surprise, right?
Thank you. Wouter?
So there are no standards yet for this. It's good that there are some plans for that. Use ORCIDs, augment on that, etc. Already you see some national portals have a very practical way of using information about experts in their country. I think it's very important to display the expertise that you have in your country. And that's often overlooked. But some portals simply deal with data that they cannot provide because it's sensitive data, so they cannot provide it in full detail. But they provide the contact information about the experts who people can contact, and they can give that detailed information.
I just wanted to add one small comment that it's not only about giving credit to people, it's also about, and I would say from a scientific perspective, maybe more importantly, is about keeping the provenance and the quality. If you do not know who performed what, at what stage, and what context, and you miss that information, basically you are almost unable to understand the progress of that transformation of the information from its original state to the final state that you are using. So it's important to keep that purely also from a scientific perspective. If we want to be keeping provenance information really relevant, we need to be able to understand and know who, what, when, why. It's simple as that.
Anne-Sophie, you want to say something? No.
Well, no, I think it's right. The idea also for the national portal, when we develop, it's also to better recognize all the national institutions who help to publish the data, who work behind, and yes, after all what you say about the importance of knowing who is doing what, and the possibility reference to the source is really important. And I think the ORCID system will be really nice when it's something I think it's really expected, and it's going to be really a good improvement.
Okay, then my third and last question to the panel is about governance and changing or redefining the business models. So, do you see a need for a coordination entity here above all the known initiative? Would it be the United Nations UNEP, or would it be another actor? And if we don't find an actor, probably one of the GAFA will take the role. So what is your opinion about that?
I probably shouldn't speak, but I can't help it. No. I think we are mature boys and girls to understand that we need to collaborate between us already. We already spent a lot of money on developing organizations, and I think we need to invest and basically make the best we can out of what we have. I don't think we need a chaperone for this. I think we just need goodwill and sitting around the same table and understanding what are our responsibilities and benefits from working together, and how we can work together, and how we can present ourselves as a more integrated, more holistic, more unified community. And we've made a lot of steps already, I have to be honest. So we're definitely not starting from scratch. I don't see the need for an overlooking organization for this. I might be wrong. But first of all, let's see how we can pick up our pieces together and basically work together. And if we cannot, then maybe someone needs to lead us. But I'm not sure we need it right now.
Thanks for the leading question too, because I feel like this was a prompt to plug a meeting that GBIF will be hosting this summer that will be looking precisely to bring as many as we can of the relevant actors to talk about precisely how we can coordinate better on the longer term. Dimitris showed an example from CERN, and they're always a useful example for us, as well as the astronomical community, where researchers get together and particularly in the case of both of them, when you're going to ask governments to spend several billions of dollars on research infrastructure, they need to have a clear idea of what it is they're spending money on and what you hope to achieve from it. Most of the advances that we've made collectively as a community have been project funded, incremental, relatively short term. DISCO actually has a bit longer trajectory, both in terms of projects already done and those coming in the pipeline stitched together. We need a similar sort of long-term roadmap collectively that we can all work toward, and be able to know that there are certain areas where it is clear that we may be able to take our piece, and we may not be able to take it now, but we can take it when this happens, and understand where we fit in that broader landscape. That's precisely what we hope to begin with this discussion in late July in Copenhagen, called the Global Biodiversity Informatics Conference 2. We're eager then to be able to share the results more broadly, because the only way that we can get to this sort of model is by having established that trust and level of cooperation among all of the relevant stakeholders and actors. So,
Wouter, want to say something?
I think you don't need so much a governance structure, but you need to have some networking infrastructure in place. To be able to collaborate, and we have that already. We have GBIF, we have TEDPIC, we have CETA for the collections in Europe, the DISCO community, we have RDA. So we have these networking infrastructures already, and we are making more and more use of that to work together.
Yes.
I want to contradict myself a bit. Just because we don't need a chaperone or someone to lead this, and we can organize ourselves, and I agree with everything you've said, doesn't mean that there are contexts in which we can operate. And one of the things I'm usually saying is the same way we develop now European research infrastructures. Some of you might know that OECD has developed certain recommendations about the development of the global research infrastructures. And in my opinion, at least, these global research infrastructures need to be predicated on top of continental level pillars. And we have the actors already. And if I want to be a bit ahead of myself, I would say that, yeah, GBIF might have a role there in that global level as a potential facilitator for enabling the discussions on a global level, and how bringing together local players, national players, and European continental level players at that discussion under the Global Research Infrastructures Initiative. And we always need to position ourselves in these contexts, because also the funding is where it goes. And we already see that perspective of the global development of research infrastructures is pushed very highly in the agenda slowly. And as Europe evolves, and I'm happy to say that Europe is leading this, and I'm really happy that finally Europe is leading something, but Europe is leading that, so that's really good, and we need to benefit from that and leverage the fact that now we position ourselves in a much better way than other continental level initiatives. Sorry, but we need to praise our continent a bit.
And you must not forget that GBIF was launched after discussion from the OECD, in English, OECD. So it's kind of already chaperone.
Okay, thank you. Is there some time for a few questions from the audience, or? Not really. Okay.
I didn't know the question.
Okay, thank you. Yep. You want to close?
Are there any urgent questions? Urgent and short questions, then.
Shorter answers.
Not difficult questions like the last one.
There's one.
Okay, please, you.
My name is Rui Figueira. I'm from Portugal, the non-manager of GBIF. My question will be, many users don't know the data, then combined with other types of data. I'm thinking on remote sensing, perhaps climate data, other environmental types of data. Thinking on the portals, global or national, do you think that we are at the point that we can serve this type of needs on combining data with other types of data, or is there something that we should think and plan on?
Thanks, Rui. Yeah, I mean, this is exactly the kind of integration of other data streams that the Living Atlas's development was intended to produce. You know, basically they had 2 years to start up, and much more than they could handle to focus solely on biodiversity data. They wanted to make sure that that was useful and applicable in national context with lots of other kinds of information. So the development of all the various modules that are part of the Living Atlas's software are expressly to bring in those kinds of elements and provide a fundamental research tool, an integrated research tool for questions, again, that pull in aspects of biodiversity, biodiversity data. So,
can I be provocative here? All right. So, because we've been discussing that already within RDA as well, and I'm now also a member of the technical advisory board of RDA, but the idea of data agnostic, data interoperability is a ridiculous idea for me. It won't happen ever. That idea of all data that needs to be interoperable to solve all potential links between data that is out there will never happen. The only way we can build data interoperability is through specific step-by-step use cases where we gradually build interoperability by concrete examples on how we really need to build links between one data set and another data set. And the only way to do that is when you have the scientific cases in place. So research infrastructures, to come to your question, need to engage very closely with these scientific cases, with these communities that actually set the questions in the first place. And they need to start working on interoperability on that basis, not on the basis of the generic agnostic interoperability. Of course, there are cases where you can do that. I mean, you can have interoperability in terms of people or through ORCIDs, but if you really want semantic linking between different domains, it needs to be approached on a much more concrete way. All right? And this is at least how we approach it now in RDA, where we start building this case by case. So research infrastructures is their responsibility, and I think GBIF is highlighting this, and I'm really glad, and I hope DISCO will be doing the same in the future. But it's when you come very close to the scientific needs, and you say, all right, guys, what exactly do you need to link, and why? And let's look into that detail, and then put it aside and build on that, and the next one, and the next one. It will take years. But this is the only concrete way, for me at least, and the way we see it in RDA now, that you can build data interoperability.
Thank you. I take this now. Thank you very much, Andre, Kyle, Wouter, Dimitris, and Anne-Sophie for your contributions. And I think we managed to put together a lot of information into those 2 hours. And there's a saying in Estonian that in the start you don't get going, but in the end it's hard to stop. That the same principle applied today also. And just for the information for Estonian viewers, you can today watch Urmas live at the Estonian National Television at 7 in the show Ringvaade, where he will talk about the National Biodiversity Portal anniversary. And we all thank you for coming and visiting Estonia and Tallinn, and I hope you have a nice spring and get to spend as much time as outdoors as possible. Thank you.